as you can see, trying to show the thalamus, the hypothalamus, pituitary gland. I'm going to kind of mention the epithalamus region, but our focus, for the most part, is going to be on that hypothalamus. Now, the thalamus itself, we're going to see two sides, left and right, so two lateral portions. So it's surrounded by the third ventricle. Whoa, 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 whoa. Now remember this time, and I said nobody should ever be late when our second part class started. So from this point forward, if you're not in here when the door closes within 30 minutes, we'll get to end class. All right, so it's surrounded by the third ventricle. You guys remember, area for helping with that cerebrospinal fluid. Now, sensory information, just like I've mentioned, from the spinal cord, just like I've mentioned, okay? It's going to synapse in the thalamus, just like I've mentioned, before going to the areas of the brain that it needs to go to. So, in looking at the structure of it, there's a medial, a lateral, and a ventral nucleus. Okay, so medial, lateral, ventral, and that thalamus. The medial is going to help with our auditory information, the lateral, the visual, the ventral, pretty much everything else that has to come in, the touch and so forth. Now, there is going to be an effect to motor function coming from the ventral nuclei. The mood modification, anterior and medial moods. What kind of mood are you in? That's exactly what it's going to have an effect on. Okay? And that's going to be connected to something called our limbic system. The emotion. You know, I just don't understand. Your emotion. That's exactly what we're going to have a connection with. The sensory integration, the lateral and the pulvinar. So, wow, that's quite a bit that this little area of the brain is going to be dealing with. For example, your sensory information, the part that has to deal with your general senses, for example, if it didn't do something that it's supposed to do, you would be aware of so much coming into you for sensory information. And just touch, for example, being aware of every single hair on your head, it would be so much information you would go insane within seconds. So, it's a good idea. We've got areas of the brain taking care of it we don't have to deal with. Now, our hypothalamus, yes, the most inferior portion of it, because it's going to have the connection to the pituitary gland. Some of the anatomy, some of the structure, it has what's termed mammillary bodies. They're bulges, and these, now check this out. Olfactory reflexes. What's olfactory?
Smell.
My smell. So what is that? the one special sense that you're going to have that has a direct connection to the brain is your sense of smell. It doesn't have to relay anywhere. So that will be your special sense that does not have to get relayed to an area of the brain by way of the thalamus. So that tells me those mammillary bodies, olfactory reflexes, and the emotional response to odors. What does that mean?
Yeah, I smell good, I get happy.
Well, it's like the smell, like it reminds you of things. Like the smell kind of reminds you of a thought.
Yes. We're getting ready to come up on that season of the year where you're going to walk into stores and they're going to have everything pumpkin and apple pie. Okay? This will be the time of the year where everything is going to be pumpkin. Pumpkin, pumpkin, pumpkin. And so you walk in a store and they might have the pumpkin, candle burning. And you're going to walk by and you're going to think, oh, Grandma's house 10 years ago, I did such and such. It's because this is where it got triggered.
And is this how, is this the science behind and or how aromatherapy works?
Yes, by how aromatherapy works.
I have an off-topic question. Why is it pumpkin on this time so big in America?
Because it's Thanksgiving and Christmas and Oktoberfest and everything else. And then this time of the year is when pumpkins become ripe. And in early days, it goes all the way back to when, pilgrims moved here. And it was part of the feast that was created. And they actually use the interior of the pumpkin for eating.
I'm not convinced. I didn't know why.
Yeah, and so when you see pumpkins, if you get one and carve it for Halloween, you have to scoop the guts out of it. Well, you don't have to, but most people do. But all that stuff you scoop out, and then what's left behind, that can actually be peeled off, scraped off, and it's pumpkin.
In my country, we only do like pumpkin soup. That's all I know for.
So you would still be cutting it up. Might be a different type of pumpkin, though, I'm guessing. Probably not the great big huge ones that we have around here. Yeah, probably a different type of pumpkin. And once it gets cut and scooped out, okay, the flesh that's left behind is what is the food portion. Just like these pumpkins that we have here. So we're going to find the emotional response. That can be a happy emotion, it can be a sad emotion, it can be an offensive emotion, whatever the case might be. This is where it's coming from. Now, the structure of the hypothalamus, because it has the connection to the pituitary gland, it's like an extension. And when you're looking at the structure, and I kind of showed you the pituitary gland, and they've got this, what looks like a little piece of wire, okay? And then the little pieces that are pointing downward, the structure that's coming from the most downward portion of the hypothalamus into what looks like the piece of wire, that's your infundibulum, okay? It's referred to as being a stalk, like that pituitary gland hanging from the base of the brain. So the hypothalamus has that direction, that connection to the pituitary gland. Therefore, the hypothalamus is controlling the endocrine system. So, input pretty much everywhere. All right? So much information coming in from all parts of the body. The fibers are going to get to go to the brainstem, the spinal cord, through that infundibulum, and once we have the connection from the hypothalamus, from the infundibulum to that pituitary gland, that pituitary gland is going to have an anterior lobe and a posterior lobe. So that part that's swinging from the stalk underneath the brain, okay, anterior lobe, posterior lobe. The lobes, the connections, pretty much everything. Because the connection from the hypothalamus to the pituitary gland is going to have the control of the hormones. And hormones affect lots of different things. And depending upon the hormone determines what is the effect. So this hypothalamus, mood, emotion, sexual pleasure, satiation, rage, fear, hormone. All these hormones. We're going to see regulation of growth, tissue repair, cell growth. I can't even, I don't even have enough room to make a list up here for it that gets controlled in the body. Thyroid hormone, you know, follicle stimulating hormone. I mean, everything. It's the coolest thing ever. We do find some cranial nerves associated, and even though not directly coming out of it, but related to the hypothalamus. So we've got some cranial nerves that are going to be involved with our ability to swallow, then our ability for shivering, which of course comes down to homeostasis. Now, the reason that I've kind of left the epithalamus in here is because of the pineal gland, okay? Now, there is an area called the habenula, which is going to be emotional and visceral responses to odors. For example, you're going somewhere and an odor hits you and it's so bad you feel like you're going to throw up. Okay? That would be a visceral response. If it was an odor that you kind of was like, you know, you walk up on it and it's like, oh man, that smells really good, and you kind of get a smile on your face and whatever, that's emotional. Now, the pineal gland, like I said, that's the reason I left it in there. Because we think, all right, that it might influence sleep, it might help regulate our biological clock, and it might play a role in the onset of puberty. All of that's still being studied, okay? But there is a lot of evidence for it. Now,
Sorry, real quick. Going back to the hypothalamus, all the information that you have underneath of it after the infundibulum, sorry.
Infundibulum?
That doesn't have to do with the infundibulum. It just has to do with the
The hypothalamus as a whole.
That
So-
as a whole. Okay.
It's everything.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Mhm.
Thank you.
The cerebrum, our largest portion, the part that people tend to label the brain. Yes, right and left hemispheres. In these hemispheres, we have our frontal lobes, parietal lobes, occipital lobes, temporal lobes, and if we could take a portion of that temporal area and lift it up, okay, we get an area called the insula. But that's deep within that tissue, okay? So it actually has to like be gently cut and lifted up to expose the insula. The structure, it has our sulci, fissures, okay, the gyri that are present. We have our longitudinal meaning long, okay, so our longitudinal fissure separating. We have a lateral fissure separating temporal from the frontal, and then we've got a central sulcus, the one that was running all the way across when you guys were looking at the brains, okay? The outer surface is going to be our cortex. All these little foldings that are present, those are our gyri, okay? So all the folds that are present. Sulci are the depressions within the folds, okay? There is a medulla. Anytime you hear the term medulla, try to let the idea of center come to mind, the middle, okay? Nuclei are present in the cerebrum, like I tried to represent over there, okay? Nuclei, this time, are within the gray matter. In the cerebellum, they were in the white matter. So, like I said, it seems like it kind of goes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And it sort of does, okay? So this structure, although odd, very unique.